Well, thanks for joining us, Bill.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Business Spectator.
Now, Bill, about a year ago, Max Yasuda, the head of Toyota, came out and he complained about industrial relations in Australia, workplace relations. Costs were too high. Now, Ford has actually announced that it's closing. So I'm joining the dots.
Oh, I'd say that...
And I'm wondering to what extent the Ford closure has to do with workplace relations.
I don't think that's joining the dots. I think that's actually writing a fairy tale, because I don't accept that Ford is shut because you pay workers reasonably. I don't accept that Ford is shut because they have a collective agreement. I don't accept that Ford's automotive workers, that their remuneration has been the X factor in Ford closure. Let us not let the Conservatives of Australia write a great lie and then have it unquestioned. It is a lie to say that Ford's decisions on Australia are based because of what a assembly line auto worker was receiving. The reason why Ford hasn't done well is they didn't make export model cars. They kept making larger cars in Australia than the consumer wanted. Consumer preferences changed, Ford did not. Indeed, I drive a Ford. I like Ford motor cars. I like motor cars. I'm interested in motor cars. The Ford Territory I drive now at last has a diesel engine in it. I wouldn't buy a Ford Territory after I had my first one because they were petrol-guzzling tanks. But the diesel engine that Ford has finally put in its Territory a couple of years ago, now that is bliss to drive. But why did it take Ford so long to put a diesel engine in a Territory? My point is not that Ford executives can't, or Ford people can't make cars, but if you want to look at what's hit the Ford Automotive Company, let us not blame the workers. They're the ones losing their jobs, incidentally.
So would you say, therefore, that the money that the government, successive governments have given Ford has just been thrown away?
Well, before we hop off your first point, you said let's join the dots between the comments of a Toyota executive a year and a bit ago and the comments and the action of Ford. I hope I've put beyond any reasonable doubt that the trail between the two does not exist. Indeed, when you go to that Toyota issue, part of the problem wasn't that Toyota had to make changes. It's that they did it in such an unfortunate manner. I met with Mr. Yasuda. I met with Toyota. What you don't do is you don't get a bus and you don't drive long-standing Toyota workers to another venue, have security guards checking them to talk about their redundancy. You know, like, there's a right way and a wrong way to treat people, and if you treat people the wrong way, you cannot be surprised if you get outbreaks of concern. Now, Toyota's settled that matter, and I'm pleased that Toyota is investing in Australia the way it is.
But it's not just Max Yasuda a while ago. I mean, everyone's now complaining about, or a lot of people in business are complaining about Australian labour costs being too high. This morning, Gary Gray talking about it in relation to gas projects. I mean, it is a common theme in business.
I'll come to the comments of about gas. But first of all, when you say everyone in business is complaining, isn't it about time in the Australian media we stop joining together a couple of examples and saying there's an emergency? You're falling for the trap that the Conservatives want to say, want people to believe that somehow Australia is going to rack and ruin because we have a strong minimum wage, because we have collective bargaining. That is because we have free and independent trade unions in a democratic society. That is rubbish. It is rubbish, and it should be called for the rubbish it is. Now, when we want to talk about productivity, productivity has increased. It is 3 times under Fair Work Act that it was under Work Choices. Not 1 times increase, not 2 times, but 3 times. And if you look at the last 7 quarters of labour productivity indices in Australia, time when Labor's been in power, it has gone up and up and up and up and up and up 7 times. We're now hitting numbers that we haven't seen since the Second World War. So this argument that somehow Australian workers won't pick up a spanner and tighten a screw, that somehow because you pay people double time and a half on one of Australia's quite infrequent public holidays, that this is sending Australia down the toilet, is not borne out by the facts. Productivity's up. When we look at industrial action, which is arguably a crude test of how the system's working, did you know that the industrial action in Australia, the amount of lost time on average that Labor's been in power for the last 5.5 years, is 1/3 of what it was under the Conservatives? There's this great lie in parts of the Australian business and media community, which says that somehow the Liberals are better at keeping the workers at their workstations and Labor is engaged in some frolic where everyone's back in the 70s going retro on industrial relations. That's nothing could be further from the truth. And lost time in Australia is 1/3 of what it was under the Liberals. And in the construction sector, it is 1/5 of the lost time. Productivity up, lost time down, and of course one of the most important indicators is the creation of new jobs. 28 million plus people have joined the unemployment queues around other first world nations since the GFC. We've added 960,000. You know, business investment. It is now 18.5% of our GDP. When the Libs were in power, it was a paltry 10% of GDP. So the facts don't bear out the hysterical sort of rumour-mongering, myth-making. You know, when everyone says there's a problem, you know, I get the chairman of large companies when they're sitting on the back deck of the Sorrento Yacht Club at Christmas at the KPMG Cuda Boat Classic may well moan about how much the workers want to be paid. But the reality is that productivity's up, industrial action's down, job creation's up, business investment's up. And by the way, that old bugbear or that old genie of inflation, it's in the bottle. It's only just north of 2%.
Bill, while accepting that a lot of Ford's problems were self-inflicted, the reality is that we are now a relatively high-cost economy with a still relatively high dollar. Is there a future for manufacturing without large-scale restructuring?
You always need to change. So the premise of your question is there a future for manufacturing without change? No, you need to have change. Only a mug would tell you can stay as you are. But we've been engaging in a path of change. I think it's important. You know, you guys are eminent economists and you've studied economics. I've done a bit of that. But my first degree at uni was in history. And I think history, and economic history, which is one of my passions, is a good indicator of what's been happening in Australia. In 1960, so long before any of you gentlemen were, you know, out of short pants or even born, in 1960, we had 30 in every 100 Australians worked in manufacturing. Now it's about 8.5. Will there be more structural adjustment? Yes. But do I think we can have a future in manufacturing? Absolutely. Our challenge is not in a race to be a commodity-producing manufacturer. We're not going to make brooms as cheaply as somewhere else. We're not going to make rope as cheaply as somewhere else. We're not going to make thongs that you wear on your feet as cheaply as somewhere else. But we can make all sorts of value-added equipment for the emerging nations and economies of Asia very well.
What about cars?
Well, I think we can also make cars, provided we make cars that people want to buy. I don't know what it is about my family, but when I was a kid growing up, they bought a Leyland. Like, oh my goodness, that was Britain's answer to the Trabant or the Lada. Anyway, we bought one because Dad was a British migrant. That was a clunker. Now, if we build, and of course Leyland doesn't manufacture in Australia anymore, if you build stuff that people don't want, you cannot be surprised if people don't buy it. But what I do believe is that we can make cars which work. We make smaller cars. We make cars which have got sustainability and energy efficiency in them. I like my current territory. The diesel engine with the SUV we've got is good. But we don't need just to make good things. We need to make excellent things. How on earth does Switzerland or Germany survive on manufacturing? They're high-cost economies, but they do so because they have strong brand values, because they spend a lot of their money on R&D. I find it interesting I think there's a lot of lessons for us in manufacturing from Finland, from Korea, from even Israel. And some of the aspects I notice is that they spend a very high portion of their budget on skilled workforce, on engineers, on design. Everyone acknowledges that the Italian economy is going through difficulties, but we still buy a lot of Italian manufactured goods. So my point is, it's the value chain and it's our ability to premium price. It's the value proposition, it's our ability to premium price, it's access to markets, it's having a skilled workforce, it's prioritising research and development. The only way we would say that we couldn't manufacture in Australia is if we thought that Australians were dumber than the rest of the world. Well, I believe, Steve, our inventors are as smart as anywhere in the world, our designers are as capable, our workforce are as clever and as innovative. So, yeah, I think manufacturing has got a future, full stop.
Bill, you referred to Germany and their car industry a moment ago. I think their assistance per head of population for their car industry is something like $48. Ours is 18 and falling. They sit in the middle of one of the world's big markets. We sit a long way distant from them. Aren't those factors that basically say that there is no future for actually making whole cars in this market? and that we ought to concentrate on this, sort of the IP elements of the industry?
We should certainly concentrate on things which have intellectual property, which everyone wants. When I was a union organiser, there's that term which, the Liberals would turn, practically outlaw, the role of unions. I work constructively with VDO, who make dashboards. I work constructively with Robert Bosch. I can think of other car component manufacturers I've worked with. There's certainly market for us in terms of making components which can fit into global supply chains, absolutely. But I would be wary about saying that we've moved from 10 years ago a 4-car company market to by 2016 a 2-car company market. I would have hoped that might provide some consolidation for the choices that people make, and that with Toyota and Holden, I would have thought there was some hope that having rationalised from 4 to 2, there was Nissan in the 80s, that went, Mitsubishi, now Ford is not manufacturing. At a certain point, our economy, I believe, is strong enough to sustain a two-car manufacturing.
Jack Nasser, in fact, said that the reverse will apply, that once the rest of the industry becomes subscale, it's harder for them to survive.
Scale is always important, there's no question about that. But we've also got to allow the interplay, which I didn't talk about much before, about the impact of the high dollar. When our dollar's at 96 cents, that's easier to manufacture than $1.06. And if our dollar was to go below 90 cents and sit somewhere between 80 and 90 cents, I think that would also be of assistance to our manufacturers. The manufacturers who will be there in the future are the ones who can withstand the high dollar as well. So I think that's an important fact. But the best thing we can do is skill our workforce. I was at a company in Knoxfield in Melbourne's outer eastern suburbs. They're making equipment whose name I won't try and pronounce here on this interview, because it might show that I can't pronounce certain technological terms. But they make devices which measure smog. They've got devices which measure the light and the interrelationship with pollution and light, which allows them to make very careful measurements in cities, so you know what's happening with pollution. Chinese cities all around China are buying our equipment. It now employs 160 people. We've got Bertocchi, food producers who are now, or Tamar Valley Dairies in Launceston. Boeing is investing in research here. I was at Warren and Brown, which is a manufacturer of NBN equipment, I met with them and our Vietnamese representatives of Viettel, which is the principal Vietnamese telecommunications carrier, who want to buy our NBN materials and have them installed so they could service suburbs and postcodes in Hanoi. So I can see a lot of good news in manufacturing, but as you gentlemen know even better than me, good news doesn't sell ratings, bad news always trumps it. So it's important to talk about the good news.
Bill, you said earlier that you'd respond to those comments by Gary Gray, who said that unreasonable pay demands by unions were a factor in the cost escalation in the LNG sector.
Yeah, I've had a look. I understand that Gary's reflecting legitimate concerns from some of the employers in the industry, but I'm not sure that the facts bear out the concern. I don't believe there are $500,000 chefs, okay? I'm telling you, if you think there's a lot of them running around offshore in Australia's hydrocarbons industry, I've got a bridge over the Yarra, at the mouth of the Yarra, I want to sell you. I used to negotiate conditions for offshore camp staff. I just don't believe those numbers, and I don't believe there's an epidemic of chefs earning more than Gordon Ramsay. I think it's a popular beat-up. What I do also think, though, is that we need to make sure two things are in place. One is we have our facts right, and two is that if there is any industrial disturbance, we need to have the tools which we can resolve it quickly. What I know is that the standard range for chefs who are tradespeople working offshore, and I've had a look at the agreements, is between $125,000 and $150,000 per annum. As we know, some of these projects go for longer than a year, but many of them don't. That's not an unreasonable pay range, I think, for the hydrocarbons industry. I'm reasonably sure that the executives of those companies pay themselves a lot more than the people out there working up on the jack-up rigs. So I don't think there is an epidemic. On the other hand, where there's talk of industrial action, I think we need to have a more speedy mechanism to resolve disputes so that where the two parties can't reach agreement, that they've got the assistance of a third party to resolve matters. But I don't buy the argument there's a plague of overpaid workers just beyond the breakers of the west coast of Australia.
I mean, the reality is, leaving aside the sort of the details, the reality is...
Detail matters.
No, but I'm just saying, okay, no, but the reality is that we're not going to cut wages.
No.
I mean, wages are what they are.
They're more driven by the market. Stephen, you and I don't want to go and work as a chef offshore. We might look at the money, but we're not prepared to do the family-destroying rosters these guys do, 3 weeks on and a week off, or, we're not... Well, there's a reason why people get the money they get. It's also because working on an oil rig is not the equivalent of having a pair of Ugg boots in front of the fireplace eating Tim Tams. It's a lot harder work than that.
But what I was going to come to is that labour costs are what they are. The other big input into manufacturing and industry generally is energy. And do you think there needs to be a more focused approach to energy policy in this country, which is what's going on in America, where they're actually focusing on bringing energy costs down in order to make their manufacturing industry more competitive?
I'm excited by the shale oil. Well, what's happening in America, though, is the shale oil, which is providing cheap energy onshore for the Yanks. And for the first time, the Americans look like being a net... for the first time in a very long time, I should say, they look like being a net exporter of energy. So that's doing wonders. So, yes, cheaper energy is really important. I'm very excited by potential developments of shale oil in Australia. I think that's pretty worthy of interest. I think that what the government's been doing is, I think Gary Gray's taken over the process. Martin Ferguson initiated with a white paper on energy policy. It is important to have one coherent national policy on energy. What I also know, so that work's happening. I do think we've got reserves of potential cheaper energy available, but I guess that has to be prospected and tested and then capitalised and then developed. I also know that when it comes to cheaper energy, this government's certainly trying to assist the Australian economy move to a less carbon polluting future, which is very sensible.
Can you just tell us about the legislation that you're putting through on super now?
As the Treasurer and I promised when we settled the superannuation issues at the beginning of April, we said that we wanted to lift concessional caps for people over 60. So it'll move from $25,000 you can put into $35,000 on 1 July this year. So that is, whatever people think about Liberal or Labor or the Greens or whoever, Labor is doing something which is demonstrably good news for, we estimate, at least 171,000 people over the age of 60 that we estimate can put aside an extra 10k into their super. Then on 1 July 2014, we're going to lift the concessional caps for people who are over the age of 50, so they can put aside $35,000 per year for every year thereafter. This is good news. We're also tidying up some of the operation of excess contributions tax, where people inadvertently have more money paid into their super in a given year than the current concessional cap. And so we're tidying up some of those issues. Again, good news. So we've got a fair bit on. We're also importantly proposing to create a charter of superannuation rights overseen by a group of custodians. I noticed Chris Cuff, the well-known investment advisor and chairman of UniSuper, has come out and said to the coalition, don't be political on this, this is a good idea. What I want to do, the way the custodians would work, is that whenever any government of the day, doesn't matter if it's won by Tony Abbott or Clive Palmer or whoever, they would have to submit their policies to the custodians, and the custodians would be resourced to give their own independent, non-agenda driven views to the Parliament, and they'd be publicly available. And they would be invited to, the Charter would look at the long term. So the interaction with pensions, prospective changes, not retrospective changes, life expectancy, and it'd help wake people up to how much they really do need to save. We've got Jeremy Cooper, Alan Goldberg, Ross Jones from APRA. We've got a range of Alana Rubin. We've got a range of experts working on what the charter might look like. We'll have that in July to show people.
I know that list of names you mentioned, are they likely to figure in the custodians?
At this stage, we would look at, I think, even having more senior people as custodians. Let's wait and see what they do. They're doing great work. What we need to do is get, I think, as custodians, a bit like the Reserve Bank, people who are trusted and seen not to have a particular axe to grind. So they'd have to be people, in my opinion, this is only my opinion at this stage, who are not active advocates for a particular point of view within superannuation, but just trusted. People who are seen to have, I don't know, former judges, former policymakers, former accountants, the consigliere of the suburban household kitchen table. These are the people we just want to say, does this make sense? Tell you what doesn't make sense. The Liberal Party proposing to put a 15% tax on people who earn less than $37,000 on their super contributions. We got rid of that. What happens now is if you earn less than $37,000 a year, and there's 3.5 million people in that category, you pay effective marginal rate of 9.5% on your tax, take-home pay, and you pay nothing on your tax that you get for your superannuation. The Libs want to restore a 15% tax. So it means that if you're a part-time laundry worker or a part-time nurse or a teacher, you'll be paying more tax on money you can't access till you retire than you will on your take-home pay. That's just stupid. The other thing the Libs have said is they want to jam superannuation at 9.25%. Now that is such a mistake. If only Robert Menzies had introduced compulsory super in the 60s, the current generation of baby boomers would have hundreds of thousands of dollars more to retire. And if only John Howard hadn't broken his 1996 promise to lift super to 15%, people retiring now would have more money. So for goodness sakes, forget politics, forget partisanship. We need everyone who's interested in superannuation to say to the Liberal Party, just let it go up incrementally, as the law says, as in fact they were saying up till March this year before they broke their own promise. Because otherwise a 30-year-old today, even if it's delayed by 2 years, the increases, is $20,000 down in their super by the time they retire. And the Liberals have got DNA form that once they start delaying super increases, when will they ever lift it again? That could cost the next generation of retirees tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Bill, the Council and the Charter are clearly an attempt to depoliticise superannuation and in future, hopefully, we don't get the sort of comments that you've just had to make. Is that an admission, though, that future governments of whatever political colour are going to have to make far more fundamental changes to the system than what you've done so far?
No, it's a recognition that superannuation is now $1.6 trillion. And I've had this idea for a couple of years, but the timing's now right to put it out there. It's too big an institution just to leave to the day-to-day prognostications of budgetary issues. People have got a sense that it's now a generation old. It's now people have got a sense it's not just something which people tinker with. So it's a recognition that we need to assure that people's retirement incomes are secure from day-to-day debates. It's a good idea, and it is depoliticisation, and it doesn't matter where I'm sitting in government or opposition, I will not give up on it till we've got it, because it is just in the best interests of the nation and Australians.
Thanks for joining us, Bill.
Cheers.